A while ago, I made a video talking about advantages of knowing how to program. I talked about why it's a great skill to have, and I encouraged people to learn a little bit about it, even if it's just simple scripting, not even full-blown programming. Well, today I want to balance that video and talk about some of the negative experiences I had while programming and sharing my applications with the world. Whenever you develop your applications, you're writing code, you rarely do it in a vacuum. Your application isn't completely standalone. Now, some applications could be, let's say it's a project tracking system and you have people enter projects and statuses, and application is by itself and fully controlled. But oftentimes, you want to integrate your application with something else. So for example, your project tracking application may want to use Relativity API and automatically pull in stats about a project, a workspace, or something else, so the data you have in your tracking application is richer and better for the user. And this is where my first frustration is, using other people's APIs, because APIs change. I'm sure I told you guys that Relativity had changed their APIs at some point, as well as their APIs are growing and becoming better and bigger to adapt to their software. But that means me as a developer, I have to stay on top of it and know what is changing and how to change my application. But same applies to other APIs, like AWS had recently changed their API while I was in the middle of a project. And it was on me that I was stupid enough to hit the update button. But as soon as I did that, I was like, whoa, no. Today is not a good day for me to deal with these changes. I just rolled it back to a previous version, tested everything out, and released. Like, I was absolutely not in the mood in figuring out why certain things weren't building right with the new version. So all the companies change their APIs at some point, and as a programmer, you have to stay on top of it and update your application accordingly. Unless you're writing a web application, the next problem you're going to have is distribution. You need to send copies of your application to run on other people's computers. And other people's computers can have different restrictions, such as security permissions, antiviruses that are installed, firewalls that are installed, different versions of Windows, maybe .NET Framework, and so on. So you may have issues having your application run in different environments. Recently, I had someone download one of my applications, and they claimed that no matter what they do, it would not run on their computer. It would come up with a weird DLL error, and they couldn't figure out what the issue is. Their IT couldn't figure out what the issue is. And the thing I was trying to tell them, look, I have this application running on many computers, multiple instances of my computers, and I have clients using it. It has to run. There's got to be something on your end that's blocking the software. And no matter how much we were going back and forth over email and getting their IT involved, they couldn't figure it out. However, a few weeks later, they sent me an email asking a question about certain functionality of the application with a screenshot of it. And I'm like, wait a second, you were able to get it to run finally? And they're like, oh yeah, we just had IT turn off the antivirus and everything started to work fine. And I'm like, I told you so. I told you a million times, it's got to be your antivirus. And they were fighting me on it, and they wouldn't turn it off no matter what. And finally, when actually they listened to my advice, it made the application run. So these are the problems you're probably going to be dealing with. Another problem you may have when users are using your software is you don't know what kind of data they're putting into your application. Now, if we talk about project tracking software, like we talked about earlier, well, the data that's going in is pretty simple. You have your client name, meta name, right, the project name, things like that. It's all fairly controlled, and the amount of data users can add is fairly limited. But when you're talking about software that loads DAT files and JSON files and XML, well, you really don't know what users are putting into it. They could be loading tons of data, and your application is going to perform poorly because you haven't tested it with that particular amount of data, or that amount of data being stored in that particular field. So for example, a client had an issue where they had a Slack export of JSON data, but the user's cross-reference file was about 1 gigabyte in size, and never ever I would have thought that the user cross-reference file could grow to be that big, but apparently it was a very large company. And so when the user was trying to load even a small amount of Slack data into my application, it would fail because it couldn't load that user cross-reference file. So I had to rewrite my algorithm to read that data in more memory efficient format. But those are the things you only come across when user is having a problem. Now the last thing I have is more specific probably to me, but it really bothers me when somebody pays for my software and then they have bad experience with it. And because of that, all my software is try before you buy. And I encourage people to download the evaluation version and try not just importing a little bit of data, but trying their entire workflow to make sure that whenever they make a purchase, software is going to work. And I still have situations where someone downloads the evaluation version, they say, hey, I need to convert Slack data, will this work? I go, sure, download it and use it. So they download it and it doesn't work for whatever reason. And then they pay for it and they go like, hey, so the software didn't work, but I figured it's because it's the evaluation version, so I paid you, so it still doesn't work. And this is why, like, guys, please do not pay me for software if you did not test it and it doesn't work properly. Now, what happened in that particular case is there was some corrupt JSON files thrown in with some of the good ones. So that's why the user was having an issue. Once we figured out, moved out the bad ones out of the way, everything worked out fine. But still, it's very upsetting for me to even hear that someone says, well, I paid you and it still doesn't work. And it really bothers me. So that's why I ask, do not buy software unless you fully evaluate it. And that applies to any software. All right, so let me know what you guys think. Are there other downsides to programming and distributing your software? Let me know in the comment section below. Don't forget to follow on LinkedIn, subscribe on YouTube, and I'll see you in the next video.